Emma Turner's day began with a quiet heaviness she tried to ignore, but the moment she looked at her empty wallet, the truth hit her so sharply she felt her breath stop. She couldn't pay her rent. She had always been the dependable one, the woman who woke up before sunrise to work the early shift at the little family bakery on Pine Street in Seattle, the woman who stayed late to help customers, cleaned the counters even when it wasn't her job, and never once missed a payment. Yet everything fell apart the week the bakery closed suddenly because the owner became severely ill. Emma didn't blame anyone, life was simply unfair at the worst moments, but the silence in her apartment that morning felt heavier than usual, because she knew she couldn't avoid the truth any longer. She owed rent, and she didn't have it. She stood in her small kitchen, holding the half-filled rent envelope with her fingers trembling, feeling a mix of embarrassment, fear, and disappointment in herself, even though none of this was her fault. The apartment had always been her safe place, a warm corner of the world where she felt she belonged, and losing it was the one thing she feared more than anything. Her landlord, Daniel Hayes, wasn't the type people warned others about. He lived in the same building, always held the elevator door for elderly neighbors, fixed broken things himself instead of calling expensive maintenance, and spoke with a calm, warm tone that made people feel comfortable without trying. But that didn't change the fact that he was her landlord, and rent was his responsibility, and the idea of telling him she couldn't pay made her stomach twist. She stood outside his office door for a full minute before knocking, rehearsing a dozen different explanations in her head, none of which made her feel any better. When Daniel opened the door, his surprise was immediate, his brows rose, his expression softened, and he stepped aside as if he had been waiting for her even though he clearly wasn't. "Emma? You look pale." "What happened?" he asked in a voice so gentle she almost cried right there. Emma tried to speak steadily but her voice cracked as she admitted, "I can't pay my rent today," the words feeling like stones dropping from her mouth. She expected disappointment, maybe a sigh, maybe even polite frustration, but instead Daniel looked at her with such honest concern that it threw her entirely off balance. He invited her into his office, a warm space filled with books, plants, and the soft smell of coffee, and sat across from her, not pressuring her but simply waiting, giving her room to breathe. Emma explained everything quickly, the bakery's sudden closure, the lost income, the stress of trying to find temporary work, and each word made her feel both exposed and strangely relieved. Daniel listened without interrupting, without judgment, his eyes never leaving hers, his expression shifting from surprise to empathy to something deeper she couldn't quite understand. When she finished, she expected the worst, but instead Daniel leaned back, folded his hands thoughtfully, and said quietly, "Thank you for telling me." His voice carried no frustration, only sincerity. He studied her with the kind of attention that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time, and it made her heartbeat quicken, not with fear but with something softer she didn't know how to name. Then, to her complete confusion, he said, "Come back this evening. We'll talk again. I won't let you lose your home, Emma." She stared at him, barely understanding what he meant, because no landlord she knew would ever say something like that. His tone wasn't official or detached, it was warm, protective even, almost like he cared about more than just the rent. But she didn't dare assume anything. She left his office with her thoughts tangled, her heart pounding, and a strange feeling she couldn't shake, as if something important had shifted between them without either of them naming it. The entire day felt heavier after that conversation, but also filled with an unexpected warmth that surprised her. She kept replaying his voice, his expression, the way he said he wouldn't let her lose her home, and she wondered why he looked at her with such gentle concern. She wasn't used to people caring. She wasn't used to kindness that had no conditions. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxious thoughts, but behind all the fear, there was one new thing she couldn't ignore: hope. It was small, uncertain, and fragile, but it was there because of him. By the time evening approached, Emma stood at her window watching the city lights flicker on, wondering what Daniel planned to say and why she felt her heart tighten every time she thought about him. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing clearly: the day she couldn't pay her rent had turned into something far more emotional and complicated than she ever expected, and she wasn't sure whether to fear it or welcome it. Emma returned to Daniel's office that evening, her mind racing with worry, anticipation, and a strange flutter she couldn't quite name, feeling the weight of the entire day pressing on her chest, yet somehow compelled to see what he had in mind, because his words earlier had been so unexpected, so kind, that she couldn't stop thinking about them. As she knocked lightly, Daniel opened the door with a calm, welcoming smile, as if he had been waiting for her, and motioned her inside, the warm light of the room making everything feel more intimate than she expected, though she quickly scolded herself for thinking that way about her landlord, reminding herself she was here because she couldn't pay her rent, not because of anything else. Yet the way he looked at her made her pulse quicken, as if he knew things about her that she hadn't even admitted to herself. Daniel gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, feeling nervous yet relieved that he hadn't raised his voice, asked for excuses, or made her feel judged. Instead he just leaned back, studied her carefully, and said in that calm, deep voice that always seemed to reach straight into her chest, "Emma, I've been thinking about your situation all day," which made her heart skip, because she had no idea what he meant, whether he was going to lecture her, give her an ultimatum, or worse, treat her as if she had failed him somehow. But then he continued, slower this time, almost hesitant, "I don't want you to leave. You're a good tenant." And, he paused, looking down briefly before meeting her eyes again, his gaze softening, "I don't like seeing you struggle," and Emma felt a strange heat rise to her cheeks, because no one had ever said something like that to her, not just as an explanation for kindness, but as a personal concern, and she could feel her emotions catching up to her chest tightening, her throat dry, her mind dizzy with the unexpected warmth of his words. She tried to respond, to explain that she didn't want to cause trouble, that she didn't expect anything, but before she could, Daniel leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his desk, fingers intertwined, and said the words that stopped her completely, "I'll give you a full month of free rent." Emma froze, the words echoing in her mind, disbelief mixing with a strange, comforting relief, because no landlord in the city would ever offer such a thing, especially not without conditions, yet the sincerity in his tone made her realize he meant it, and that he wasn't trying to manipulate her, he was just helping her, out of genuine concern, something she had rarely seen, and as she opened her mouth to protest, he quickly added, "You can, and you will," his voice firm but gentle, leaving no room for argument yet somehow making her feel safe and understood. "But why?" she asked softly, her voice almost trembling, because she couldn't understand why a man she barely knew would go this far for her, and Daniel's eyes softened further, and he leaned back, a little vulnerable, a little uncertain, before he said, "Because I believe in helping people when life knocks them down. And because letting you go would hurt more than it should." And for a moment, Emma thought she saw something more behind those words, a flicker of emotion that wasn't just kindness, but something deeper, something personal, something that made her heartbeat accelerate and her mind swirl with questions she didn't dare ask out loud. She sat there, stunned, her mind trying to process the unexpected generosity, the personal attention, and the strange intimacy that came with it, feeling both gratitude and a stirring emotion she couldn't yet define. Because Daniel wasn't just being a landlord, he was being present, noticing her, caring about her, and the effect was immediate, almost overwhelming, like a soft, warm current running through her chest. Then, he looked at her with an expression that made her forget her worries for just a moment, his eyes earnest, his voice quiet. "There's more," he said, and Emma's stomach tightened with both curiosity and nervousness, her thoughts racing in a million directions, because if the free rent wasn't enough, what could possibly come next? Daniel leaned forward again, his hands resting on the desk, voice dropping slightly, "I didn't just offer you free rent out of kindness," and Emma's pulse quickened, her mind spinning, because what could he possibly mean, and why did the way he said it make her feel like the room had grown smaller, more private, more significant? She searched his face for a clue, for a sign, but found only sincerity. Something raw, something unguarded that made her feel strangely exposed, yet comforted at the same time, and she realized that despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, she trusted him, because he had never given her a reason not to. "Because I care," he said simply, his voice soft, not loud, not demanding, just honest, and it struck her in a way she hadn't anticipated, because she had never considered that someone could care for her so openly, so freely, without expecting anything in return. And yet here he was, standing, sitting, breathing that truth into the room, making it impossible to ignore, making her heart feel both heavy and light all at once. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes, but they weren't sad tears, they were relief, gratitude, and something tender stirring deep inside, a strange warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, because she had spent so long surviving, planning, and worrying, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be noticed, to be valued, to be genuinely cared for. Daniel's eyes held hers, steady and unwavering, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared, leaving only the two of them, the quiet hum of the city outside, the soft lamplight in the office, and the weight of unspoken emotions that hung between them, almost tangible, almost electric. And Emma realized that yesterday's fear, today's anxiety, and this moment's vulnerability were all threads weaving a pattern she had never expected, a pattern that somehow made her feel seen in a way she had always longed for but never admitted. And even though she still didn't fully understand the depth of what he meant, even though she still couldn't grasp why he was so invested in her well-being, she knew one thing: for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone, she didn't feel small, and she didn't feel like life had left her behind, because Daniel's unexpected offer, his gentle care, and the quiet intensity in his gaze had shifted everything, making the impossible feel possible, the frightening feel safe, and the ordinary day feel like the start of something neither of them could have planned, something that hung in the air, fragile yet undeniable, something Emma felt in her chest with every breath she took, leaving her both anxious and excited, terrified and hopeful, because the day she couldn't pay her rent had suddenly become the day her heart had been noticed, and her life had begun to change in ways she wasn't ready to name, yet couldn't ignore. The next morning, Emma couldn't sleep. Daniel's words from the night before played over and over in her mind, a mix of warmth, surprise, and a nervous flutter that she couldn't ignore, because he hadn't just offered her help with rent, he had revealed something more, something personal, something that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts spin, and now she felt compelled to see him again, to understand what had really happened, and maybe, though she wasn't ready to admit it fully, to acknowledge the feelings that had begun stirring inside her. When she reached his office, her heart was pounding so fast she thought he would hear it through the door, but Daniel opened it almost immediately, his calm expression softening into a gentle, almost anxious smile that made her chest tighten with anticipation, because she sensed that whatever he was about to say would change everything, and she wasn't sure she was ready, yet somehow she knew she couldn't turn back. She stepped inside, the morning light casting soft shadows across the room, and Daniel motioned for her to sit, sitting himself with an unusual hesitance that made her notice the subtle tension in his shoulders and the way his hands fidgeted slightly on the desk, and for the first time, Emma realized how human he was, how much he could feel, how much he could care, and it made her own heart ache in response, a strange mix of hope, nervousness, and a longing she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. After a moment of quiet, he spoke, his voice low but steady, almost as if he were speaking to himself as much as to her, saying, "Emma, there's something I need to tell you," and her stomach fluttered because she knew instinctively that this was the moment that would define the way she saw him from now on, that would shift the balance between them from landlord and tenant to something far more personal, far more intimate. Even though they hadn't acknowledged it yet, she leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped, trying to steady her voice, yet unable to stop the slight tremor of anticipation, and Daniel continued, "I didn't just offer you free rent out of kindness," which made her pause, her breath catching, her mind racing through every possible explanation, but none of them prepared her for what came next, because he looked at her with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and cherished, and he said simply, "Because I've had feelings for you for a long time," and the words struck her like lightning, unexpected, powerful, and completely undeniable, leaving her momentarily speechless as the room seemed to shrink around them, filled only with the truth of his confession and the sudden awareness of her own heartbeat echoing in her chest. Emma's mind whirled, shock and disbelief mixing with a strange, thrilling sense of relief, because she had noticed him too, in small ways, the way he always remembered the smallest details about her, the way he quietly fixed things around the building, the way his calm presence seemed to create a safe space whenever she was near, but she had never allowed herself to think that his attentions could be anything more than simple kindness, and now she was forced to confront the undeniable possibility that he cared for her in a way that went far beyond tenant and landlord. Daniel's eyes searched hers, vulnerable and sincere, and he continued, voice trembling slightly, I know it may seem inappropriate. I know I'm your landlord. I fought with myself about saying anything, but every time I saw you, every smile, every small gesture, I felt something I couldn't ignore, and Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, because the honesty, the rawness, and the courage it took for him to admit his feelings made her heart ache and swell at the same time, a mix of fear, excitement, and longing that left her breathless and uncertain, yet strangely calm in a way she couldn't explain. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, as if admitting this truth had exhausted him, and she realized that this was more than a confession, it was a risk, a vulnerability he was offering without expectation, without demand, simply a truth laid bare, and it touched something deep inside her that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time, a combination of trust, hope, and curiosity that made her pulse quicken and her chest feel tight in the best way. She struggled to find words, to respond, to acknowledge the flood of emotions, but nothing came out beyond a quiet, I don't know what to say, which made him smile softly, a small, relieved smile, almost shy, almost embarrassed, yet filled with warmth, and that smile alone made her heart twist in a way she couldn't control, because it was genuine, unguarded, and completely hers to witness. Daniel leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a gentle whisper, "You don't have to say anything tonight. Just know that I care, and I wanted you to know. Nothing about the free rent, nothing about anything else changes this, I just needed to tell you." And Emma felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and a tender, thrilling sense of possibility that left her lightheaded and trembling inside, her mind spinning with every thought she had ever pushed aside about connection, longing, and the warmth of someone noticing her fully. She realized that his feelings didn't make the situation awkward, they made it alive, charged with honesty and humanity, and she understood that this moment, this confession, was more than words, more than feelings. It was a turning point, a delicate bridge between what had been and what could be, a moment of possibility she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she wanted to pretend she could. Daniel's eyes softened as he studied her reaction, waiting patiently, giving her the space to process everything without pressure. And in that space, Emma began to understand the depth of what he had just shared, how rare it was for someone to be so honest, so vulnerable, so willing to expose their heart without expectation or shame, and how much it meant to her that he had chosen her to share it with. She felt a warmth rising in her chest, a mixture of hope and excitement, tinged with the uncertainty of what lay ahead, because admitting feelings, even quietly, could be frightening. Yet there was a thrill in the vulnerability, a strange, intoxicating sense of intimacy that she hadn't anticipated. She realized she trusted him already, and that trust was a foundation she could lean on, even if the future was unknown, even if the feelings were new and confusing, because Daniel's honesty had created a space where she felt safe, valued, and seen in a way she hadn't felt in years, and that knowledge, that awareness, made her pulse quicken and her chest swell with emotion she could neither deny nor fully explain. The room seemed charged, quiet except for the hum of the city outside, yet alive with the unspoken possibilities between them, and Emma understood that this was a defining moment, a point of no return in the delicate dance of emotion, connection, and emerging romance, where one brave confession could transform lives, hearts, and futures in ways she hadn't dared imagine, leaving her both terrified and exhilarated, yet ready to face what came next with an open heart, because the day she could not pay her rent had unexpectedly become the day she realized that someone had noticed her, cared for her, and perhaps, in a way neither of them had expected, opened the door to something entirely new, fragile, and beautiful. The next morning, Emma woke up with a restless energy she couldn't ignore, her thoughts consumed by Daniel's confession from the day before, the memory of his gentle voice, the warmth in his eyes, and the way he had made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt for years. And though a part of her was nervous, unsure how to proceed, another part of her was drawn irresistibly toward him, compelled to return to his office and face the emotions that had suddenly become impossible to ignore. She dressed quickly, heart racing, and as she descended the stairs of the building, she realized that every step felt heavier with anticipation yet lighter with the strange hope that had settled in her chest, and when she reached Daniel's door, her hand hovered over the knob for a moment, breath-catching, because she knew that this visit could change everything between them, yet she also felt an undeniable courage that came from the realization that she wanted more than just to live in the apartment. She wanted to see where this connection could go, wanted to acknowledge the feelings that had started to bloom quietly but persistently in her heart, and when Daniel opened the door and saw her standing there, his expression shifted instantly from calm professionalism to something softer, a mixture of relief, surprise, and something tender that made her chest tighten and her pulse quicken, because she knew he had been thinking about her all night as well. She stepped inside, and the morning light spilling into the office made everything feel more intimate, more personal, the familiar smell of coffee and books surrounding them, yet charged now with the energy of unspoken possibilities, and she noticed for the first time the subtle changes in his demeanor, the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful way he gestured toward the chair, and she realized that he was just as nervous, just as vulnerable as she felt, and it made her feel connected in a way words could not yet express. Daniel gestured for her to sit, and when she did, she felt her hands tremble slightly, not with fear but with the overwhelming mix of excitement and nervous anticipation that had been building since yesterday, and he waited patiently, giving her space, his eyes never leaving hers, full of warmth and quiet concern, and for a moment the world outside disappeared, leaving only the two of them in the soft glow of morning, suspended between what had been, what was, and what could be. Finally, Daniel spoke, voice low and steady, yet carrying the vulnerability of someone opening their heart fully. "Emma, I've been thinking about us since yesterday," and her chest tightened because those words confirmed what she had suspected, that this moment was about more than rent, more than responsibility, more than anything practical. It was about connection, about something human and real, something fragile yet undeniable, and she leaned in slightly, listening, trying to steady her voice as she whispered, "And, what did you think?" Daniel smiled softly, almost shyly, a small flicker of relief and joy crossing his features, and he continued, "I realized that what I feel for you, it's more than I expected. I can't ignore it anymore, and I need you to know that whether or not you feel the same, my respect, my care, and my support for you won't change, because I want to be here for you in every way I can." Emma felt a warmth spreading in her chest, a mixture of relief, hope, and a fluttering excitement, because his words were not demanding or pressuring, they were honest, open, and patient, allowing her to respond on her own terms, and that honesty made her heart ache with the recognition that such vulnerability was rare, precious, and beautiful. She found herself speaking before she could stop herself, voice soft but steady, "Daniel, I think I've felt something too, for a while, but I never admitted it, not even to myself, because I wasn't sure it was possible, or appropriate, or safe, but now I realize I want to see where this goes, slowly, carefully, but with all my heart." And when she said it, she felt a weight lift from her chest, a mixture of relief and nervous exhilaration, because admitting feelings out loud, to someone she trusted so deeply, felt both terrifying and liberating, and the vulnerability between them suddenly became a bridge instead of a wall, connecting their hearts in a way that was soft, tender, and full of unspoken promise. Daniel's eyes softened further, and he smiled, a real, unguarded smile that lit up his face and reached his eyes, and in that smile Emma saw joy, hope, and an affirmation that she wasn't alone in this, that the emotions swirling between them were mutual, and that for the first time in a long time, she felt truly understood and seen. He leaned forward slightly, voice gentle, almost a whisper, "We don't have to rush anything, Emma. We'll take it one day at a time. I just want you to know that you're safe with me, and that my feelings won't change the way I treat you or your life unless you want them to." And those words filled her with a profound sense of trust, respect, and a quiet joy, because they confirmed that their connection wasn't just fleeting attraction, it was built on understanding, patience, and genuine care, and she could allow herself to lean into it without fear. For a long moment, they sat quietly, letting the soft light of morning fill the room, the hum of the city outside fading into insignificance as the energy between them grew, a mixture of anticipation, tenderness, and the delicate thrill of something new, something beautiful, something real that neither of them had planned but both recognized immediately as precious. Emma felt her heart swell with emotion, a mix of hope, gratitude, and longing, because in Daniel she saw not just a landlord, not just a helper, but someone who had chosen to be vulnerable, who had chosen honesty over fear, who had chosen to care without expectation, and it made her want to be brave, to reciprocate that care, to explore this connection with patience and openness. And as she finally stood to leave, she realized that the day she couldn't pay her rent had transformed completely into the day she discovered that love, or at least the beginning of it, could exist quietly, unexpectedly, and beautifully in the most unlikely moments. Before she stepped out, Daniel called softly, "Emma. For the record, yesterday wasn't the day you couldn't pay your rent. It was the day I finally found the courage to tell you how I feel." And she turned to him, smiling, feeling her chest tighten with warmth and hope, because she realized that the most unexpected events often led to the most meaningful changes, and that sometimes, the challenges we fear the most become the moments where hearts open, connections deepen, and the start of something real and lasting quietly unfolds, leaving both people changed, hopeful, and ready to explore the possibilities ahead. Together, and as she walked back to her apartment, Emma felt a gentle joy settle in her chest, knowing that she had not just survived a difficult moment, but had discovered a tenderness, a trust, and a love that could grow, patiently, beautifully, and fully, in the quiet, unexpected corners of life.